Good evening and welcome to another edition of Prompt Response. I am your host, Ryan Ozzy Smith, voted #1 creamiest voice on Twitch 3 years running. I'm a voice actor, a Twitch streamer, and you can find me on Twitch by searching Aussie Man Plays. I'm also your host for tonight's reading. Takeout, the fourth chapter of the Bram Stoker Award finalist book, Bittersweets, by Angela Yuriko Smith. This story does have some elements of self-harm and graphic violence, so if these are things you would rather not listen to, now is your time to click out. Prompt Response is sponsored by Authortunities, a weekly calendar of author opportunities for busy writers who need to know who, how much, and when is the deadline on Substack. You can subscribe to authortunities.substack.com or follow the links in the description. In the last chapter, we met Maeve, an elderly woman looking to revisit her past and make amends with a recreational death, something she considered a new fad. And now, let's see who will be visiting the Bittersweets next. If you would like to read along, the book is available to read on Kindle Unlimited. Links in the description. Chapter 4. Takeout. Pay attention, snapped the instructor. Each group of potential new drivers was the same, unruly and stupid. The group of final year students indulged him with their eyes, but their thoughts were obviously on the 6 compact cars parked at the edge of the light in the otherwise darkened room. They were in the basement of the Bittersweets, a hotel that specialized in the singular experience of death, perfect for new driver experiences. He always started his orientations with the room black so his students could focus on him, not on the surroundings. It also gave time for the volunteer bodies to get in place before they began. A mousy girl with a washed-out complexion and pale orange hair raised her hand. He nodded to her, bracing himself for teenage angst or sarcasm, or both. If you don't take this perspective orientation, you don't get personal transportation privileges, right? She was chewing on the thumbnail on her other hand. Are we really going to have to kill people? She looked nervous. He warmed to her genuine concern. Before he could answer, Dylan, an oversized repeat attender, piped in. Tons, he said. That was the best part last time I did this. The instructor narrowed his eyes at Dylan. He remembered this kid. You probably shouldn't admit that you failed correct perspective last time. Dylan curled up a lip in a smile that wasn't meant to be friendly. If Dylan failed this time, he only got one more shot before he was doomed to a life of public transit. The instructor didn't see that attitude going anywhere except on the potential deviant lists. He was ready to fail him now. The girl with pale skin bit her lip and swallowed nervously. The instructor addressed the girl. Yes, to get a proper perspective, you have to kill people. Here at the Bittersweets, it's not a big deal though. He pointed to a button camera on the ceiling overhead. One of the best resuscitator crews here is waiting a monitor away to step in and fix everyone. And remember, the instructor paused for effect and looked at all of them individually. A half-dozen young faces looked back at him, rapt at his words. He loved it. Everyone who dies here today volunteered for this. They are being compensated. Dylan just grinned for no reason. The kid was warped, that was clear. The instructor debated just failing him now, but knew he had to follow protocol or the kid would just appeal. Kids were just too smart these days. He blamed the apps. With legalese everywhere, they didn't even have to research anymore. Does everyone understand the point of this? He asked. The group remained mute, eyes fixated on the cars behind him. Their eagerness was palpable. Only the red-haired girl seemed hesitant. By contrast, Dylan was overeager. The kid was actually licking his lips in anticipation. The instructor tried not to show his disgust, despite his feelings. The point of this is to experience the consequences of driving mistakes in an emotionally real way. It will make you better drivers. As usual, there was no reaction to the most important point of his lecture. Okay then, choose your cars and let's play. Remember, all the cars are speed capped at 30 miles per hour, so you can't get into too much trouble. The teenagers surged past him before he barely finished. He always thought it made more sense to make all the cars the same color to avoid this rush. Black, he thought. All the cars should be black. That would avoid all the last-minute scuffle for the red car. Once the cars had been chosen with a minimum of infighting and the students belted themselves in, he went around for final checks. The mousy girl was named Sarah. It said on her application. He peeked into her car to find her gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles. Her car, appropriately, was grey. Hey, don't be afraid, he told her. Try to hit at least one person so you can pass with proper perspective. Her eyes darted up to meet his before looking back at the dash. She shook her head. I'm afraid not, she said. I'm an empath. This is going to hurt me as much as them. The instructor felt instant pity. Empaths had the right perspective from birth. Forcing them to take orientations like this was cruel. They should have the right to refuse. He gave her a genuine look of concern. If this gets too much for you, signal me, and I'll get you out. Try to hit someone early and get it over with. I'll let you wait outside. She nodded, paler than when she came in. He could already see the tears clustering in the corners of her eyes. Hey, can we get on with this? Dylan's voice rang out in the shadows a few cars away. The instructor decided he actually hated the kid. He'd always had a problem with people that enjoyed pain. Fantastic, he thought. I have an empath and an apath in the same orientation. Someone really screwed up the screening. He took his radio out. Let's get going, he said to it. Lights on. High above them, lights switched on, illuminating the darkness, and temporarily blinding the drivers. This was also part of his plan. It gave him a few minutes to get off the floor while their eyes adjusted. He headed towards the exit, walking backwards when he neared the door so he could watch. As expected, the students were blinking and peering through their windshields at the room, revealed so abruptly. The basement of the Bittersweets always surprised first-timers with how huge it was. Like an industrial cathedral, the lowest levels were designed for large-scale experiences. Ceilings scaled at least 3 stories, blinding the eyes with massive floodlights that hung like flying saucers from an old sci-fi movie. He backed against the exit, safe now. The first car, Dylan's of course, was already moving. Beyond the cars was a mocked-up street scene. Large mats that simulated asphalt had been rolled out to make streets. Stoplights and storefronts formed a subsection of a town. Volunteer bodies were already moving around, some of them more hesitantly than others. On his side, he could see a volunteer hiding behind one of the storefront facades. Remind the volunteers that they don't get compensated if they don't get killed, he said into the radio. 30 seconds later, he watched a volunteer bend her head and put her hand to her ear, listening. Another 10 seconds, she nodded, spoke a few words, and reluctantly went around the storefront to cross the street. Meanwhile, more cars had started moving. Dylan's red car was already on the imitation roadway, driving down the center line and veering towards the volunteers on the sidewalk. The instructor pulled the mic off the wall next to the door and flipped on the loudspeaker. Dylan, the idea is to at least pretend like you're following the road rules. Each of you only needs to hit one person to pass. Dylan's car swerved onto the sidewalk and narrowly missed a volunteer who jumped, in spite of their purpose. If you kill too many people, I will consider you to have failed corrective perspective. Dylan yelled something and waved from the car. The instructor flipped off the mic and hung it back on the wall. I am not passing that boy, he muttered to himself. Predictably, the grey car was the last to enter the mock town. The instructor could already picture Sarah inside, face already wet from tears as she prepared to go against her nature. If a car could move reluctantly, hers did. The instructor's cousin had been an empath, and they'd grown up together. The cousin had been institutionalized at his own request shortly after they graduated. Now he existed in an emotionally minimalist world, insulated from media, in order to stay sane. I should visit him soon, he thought. Dylan's car surged ahead. The volunteers dodged his overly aggressive attempts to hit them, despite their training. Dylan's car ran into a storefront and it swayed precariously. The instructor was about to reach for the microphone again when the first body fell. A pale blue car smacked into a woman crossing the street. The instructor couldn't remember the driver's name as he notated time and reaction. The car stopped, and then the driver's side flew open. A boy jumped out and ran to the woman. He cradled her on the ground, body language expressing remorse. The instructor scribbled, "Pass," next to the time of hit. Dylan's car had stopped, and the big boy was standing, half out of his car, yelling something. He popped back and slammed the door before gunning the engine. His little red car took off down the roadway, heading for the boy and the woman huddled in front of the blue car. The instructor's stomach knotted as he reached for the mic again. Before he could mash the talk button, Dylan's car smashed into the two on the ground, clipping the blue car so that it spun around sideways. The instructor saw the boy's head impact the bumper before the car rolled over both of them. There was a flash of Dylan's face laughing maniacally, and then the car was racing past. "Dylan!" The instructor screamed into the mic. The speaker system shrieked with him, feedback striking eardrums like audible lightning. In the town, a little yellow car was trying to turn around as the red car sped towards it. "Stop now!" the instructor yelled, and again feedback rang out, contorting his voice into a mechanical scream. The red car smashed into the driver's side door, pushing it sideways into a light post. The light post toppled, the bolts that held it to the floor no match for the heavy impact. Dylan's car reversed, slamming into another storefront, causing it to buckle. "Shut them down!" the instructor yelled, this time into his radio. 30 miles an hour may as well have been 100 to a mind bent on destruction. The driver of the yellow car opened the door and rolled out. Dylan hit the gas, crushing the boy between two vehicles. Alarms went off and red lights started flashing high overhead. All the cars stopped moving except Dylan's. Volunteers started scattering, running for the exits. "Resuscitate us now!" screamed the instructor. Side doors along the far edges of the vast room flew open, and medical geeks started running towards the mess. Volunteers ran the other way, eager to forego any compensation to escape what had turned into a nightmare. Dylan's car backed up and started up again, down the middle of the road and to the edge of the fake buildings. The instructor realized the kid was going for the resuscitators. "Fail!" he screamed. "You fail! Stop!" Dylan couldn't hear him from this distance, and it was doubtful he would have listened anyway. The boy was bent on mayhem, mad face leering over the steering wheel, foot mashed on the gas. Too late. The group running to help noticed the rogue car aiming for them. They all stopped and then started trying to run different directions. One dropped his bag, causing the person behind him to trip over it, sprawling. The red car was nearly on them, prepared to mow down the scrambling group of bodies. From the side, a grey car appeared from nowhere and ran directly into the driver's side door. Dylan's car skidded sideways 10 feet before both cars stopped. All movement ceased as everyone tried to process the new situation. Dylan's door flung open and he half fell out. His mouth gaped as he yelled something to the driver in the grey car. Sarah started backing up, slowly at first and then picking up speed. Dylan had stumbled around his car by now, waving a pudgy fist at her car and yelling. He stumbled towards her, clumsy aggression giving him a lopsided, almost skippish gait. Chaos took over. The remaining 2 student drivers had exited their cars and were running for the outskirts. The resuscitators had scattered. Not used to being targets, they were fleeing in all directions. The instructor was screaming incoherently into the mic and loudspeakers simultaneously, creating a cacophony of discordant feedback. In the middle of it all, the grey car stopped backing up. Dylan continued running, his helter-skelter gait evening out as he regained his balance. Sarah didn't stand a chance against the hulking, meat-fisted monster coming toward her. The instructor dropped everything and started running towards them. Dylan was closing in when the grey car started moving. Tires squealed against the smooth floor as the driver punched the acceleration too quickly. Catching traction, the little car lurched forward, quickly gaining speed, heading straight for Dylan. He stumbled and stopped, unsure, and then the grey car was ploughing into him. Catching him mid-thigh, he slammed face first into the hood before flipping backward over the entire car and slamming into the floor behind. The grey car slid to a stop. Again, time stopped in shock. Before anyone could react, Sarah yanked the car in reverse and sped back the way she'd come, nearly flipping the small car as she bumped over Dylan's prostrate form. Twice more, the little grey car ran over the boy, each time bouncing the vehicle high like a miniature macabre monster truck. The third time, Sarah stopped, and the instructor ran to her door, expecting to find a trembling, sobbing girl. Instead, Sarah sat, dry-eyed, on her phone. The instructor stopped, confused. "Legalities for vehicular manslaughter with a self-defense, vigilantism angle, please," she said to her phone. "Understood. A legal expert will be contacting you shortly," the phone answered. Sarah looked up at the instructor. He was leaning on her door with both hands, panting and confused. She smiled, and a hint of the old Sarah passed across her face, like a nervous shadow, and evaporated. "I think he cured me of my empathy," she said. "I actually wanted to hurt him. I've never felt like that before." Her eyes glowed with excitement, and the instructor felt a cold fist slowly knot up in his bowels. Across the expanse of the room, side doors were flying open and medical techs were rushing towards the mayhem, even as Riel came down to survey the disaster. The phone's dispassionate voice spoke again. "Sarah, please refrain from any emotional commentary, or a legal expert may not be able to assist you. A team is en route to meet you at the Bittersweets." A few feet away, Dylan lay, a pile of meat on the slick floor. Sarah leaned forward over the dashboard, taking it in, and grinned. "I'm completely cured of empathy," she said. "This feels amazing." The instructor wasn't sure if she was talking to herself, Dylan's bleeding body, or him. He felt sick. "Sarah, I must caution you again. Please refrain from any emotional commentary," said the phone. "Okay, sorry," said Sarah. She was looking at what was left of Dylan with a wicked grin. The instructor didn't believe her. And that concludes our story for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this reading of Bram Stoker Award finalist book, Bittersweets, by Angela Yuriko Smith. I'm Ryan Ozzie Smith, and it has been a pleasure to be your host tonight. If you would like to connect with me, join me on Twitch by searching Aussie Man Plays, or click on my link in the description.